Welcome back to the Barrels Talk Podcast. We are back with another episode of Let's Talk About it. And today we are continuing our series with doing a deep dive into every single NBA team before this upcoming season. This episode we are going to be focused on the Portland Trail Blazers, but before we get into that, make sure to leave a like on the episode and subscribe to the channel. Stay up to date on future content. We got NFL coming. Gonna still be doing basketball. Let's talk about it as well. But without further ado, we can get right into the episode talking about the Portland Trail Blazers, which is a team that had a disappointing year one to the rebuild. If you want to kind of look at it from that perspective, Scoot Henderson just kind of had a really kind of down, disappointing year one. But with NBA guards coming into the league, I want to give it more time, especially in today's game where I feel like this Portland Trail Blazers kind of wasn't set up for success in this year one of this rebuild, because I think they just have a lot of going on. They have a lot of position guys that, like, they have a lot of guards and wings that I'm kind of like, they should really pivot and move off of some of those guys, because in terms of just a developmental perspective, like, Anthony Simons is really kind of in the way of a development from a Scoot Henderson and Shaedon Sharpe, and he's already on the extension. So I felt like them not moving him this offseason was kind of a question mark to me, because I thought that he was somebody that could have had a big market if he were to become available from the Portland Trail Blazers, because he is somebody that might not be the greatest defender, but in terms of just a pure scorer at the guard position, I think Anthony Simons is very underrated in the league and doesn't really get talked about enough. But he's kind of in a weird position now to where, like, they're trying to develop Scoot Henderson. They're trying to develop Shaedon Sharpe. And I feel like Anthony Simons has become the kind of odd man out in this situation. And I'm very surprised that I haven't really seen anything about him just becoming available at all, because I think he's kind of the odd man out, and he's kind of the main thing that could possibly hinder development for Scoot Henderson and Shaedon Sharpe, which I think is going to be the backcourt of the future for this team. And I think Anthony Simons could get you a pretty solid return in terms of just draft capital, because they have young talent throughout the entire roster. So it's very interesting to see what they do with this team, with the kind of log jams that they do have. Because looking at what they did in the offseason, you trade for Deni Avdija on draft night, which I think is a great move. Because he is somebody who I was thinking was a building block for the Washington Wizards. Apparently not. Apparently I was wrong, and he was available. And for what they did get for him, it was Malcolm Brogdon and the 14th overall pick, I want to say it was, and they ended up getting Bud Carrington, and they're probably going to end up flipping Malcolm Brogdon down the line at some point. But I still thought it was a head-scratcher of a move, because I really liked Deni Avdija and Bilal Coulibaly, and kind of that kind of fit they have, that tandem they could possibly build on for the future. But Portland swoops in, gets Deni Avdija. I think that's a perfect building block piece, somebody that can play off the ball and do a little bit of everything next to a Scoot Henderson, a Shaedon Sharpe. You still have a Jeremy Grant on the roster and a DeAndre Ayton, two guys which I'm surprised they're just not making anybody available. I don't know the mindset of this Portland Trail Blazers team. Like, are they obviously tanking? I think they're in a rebuild, but like, they have a roster to where you're like, they're not really tanking. Like they have a lot of good talented guys on the roster, to where with this loaded draft class coming up, and you see somebody like a Cooper Flagg that could fit next to a Scoot and a Shaedon Sharpe and a Deni Avdija for the future, and you're like, Jeremy Grant, DeAndre Ayton, and Anthony Simons, they're going to win you a couple more games than you're probably not supposed to. And I'm very shocked. I know Jeremy Grant's contract is probably the reason why a lot of teams aren't picking up the phone in terms of trade talks for Jeremy Grant, but I think DeAndre Ayton is still a very valuable center. He just needs a good first half of the year where he's healthy to show his value again. I think Jeremy Grant and DeAndre Ayton could be very popular names to be moved at this year's deadline, even in Anthony Simons, because looking at the outlook on this team, this is a team that wants to tank, in my opinion. This is a team that is looking how loaded the 2025 draft class is, and they're like, we want to get in on that action. And even like the bench, they have a ton of guys that they kind of just need to stay healthy, like a Robert Williams, to get his value up to be traded. I like his defensive potential, but then you go out and you draft Donovan Clingan, which I'm still kind of up in the air about. I don't really know. It's just so weird, because doing mocks like I did for a team like the Portland Trail Blazers throughout the draft process, it was so tough to see what this team needed, because they kind of have a lot of depth at all their positions. They have a Kamara at the wing spot, you have Matisse Thybulle, you have Robert Williams, you already had DeAndre Ayton, you have Jeremy Grant, like I said, Scoot, Sharpe, and Simons in your guard spot. So like, drafting wise, they had 2 lottery picks, and like, they pivoted and got somebody like Deni Avdija, which I think was a great move. But then it's like, it's kind of hard to see where the fit lies. And I think Donovan Clingan is a good fit, and he's going to be a good player. But I think having Robert Williams there already, they need Robert Williams to play so they can trade him for something, right? Like, I think that's the same thing with DeAndre Ayton. They want DeAndre Ayton to play and to hoop so they can possibly pivot and trade him for something, I feel like, because he doesn't really, not saying he doesn't fit their timeline because he is still really young, but it's just like at some point this is going to be a couple year process for what they're trying to build, right? So that's why I'm getting out with the Portland Trailblazers. So it's so interesting because they have a lot of things going on with that roster. I'm still in between on Chauncey Billups as a coach. I think it's kind of a tough situation that he has landed in post Damian Lillard era. So it's his job to kind of build a whole new culture there in Portland, which is going to be easier said than done because of what they have to work with. You had a down year from Scoot Henderson. Give it time. I think Scoot Henderson is still going to be a very, very good point guard in this league, but I feel like with point guards coming into the league now with what they are asked to do, I think it can be a lot of pressure, and him coming from the G League Ignite compared to college and learning from the college game, it's a whole different world. So I think you got to give Scoot Henderson more time to develop, and I think he's going to have a bounce back year too, getting a feel for the game and the NBA level compared to, this is, I feel like, why I wasn't a huge fan of the G League Ignite, because I feel like the reps and the experience that you can get from somebody like a college coach and going through the college scenery and everything else and learning more that way compared to the G League Ignite, it's just two completely different worlds. I think I'm starting to see the value of college in terms of like getting drafted from college compared to the G League being more impactful for some NBA players, especially right away. I think Scoot Henderson is going to pick things back up really right away, and I think he's going to have a great bounce back year too. But they got to figure out some stuff with their roster. They have to figure out some of the logjam spots if they want to turn those guys into draft picks at the deadline. But Portland should be a very active selling team at this year's deadline. In terms of the X factor for this team going kind of forward, I think it's Deni Avdija. If they can get Deni Avdija to really develop into a do-it-all 3, which is the premium in the NBA right now, Deni Avdija has all the capabilities of being one of the best small forward / power forwards in the league with the right development and the right time with the right team. So looking at that, I think Deni Avdija is the main X factor because he is a perfect connecting piece that they kind of got on the low, in my opinion, that can really develop and be a great piece for this team. And I think he's the X factor for the Portland Trailblazers kind of going forward into this future rebuild process. In terms of expectations, I still think this is a team that's going to be at the bottom of the West. Like I've kind of said, I think they're going to be big time sellers at this year's trade deadline. And I think they should look to be. I think they have a lot of talent on that roster that contending teams could want, even with a big contract like a Jeremy Grant, which I think they would be perfectly fine with getting off of. Even a DeAndre Ayton, who is somebody doesn't really fit your timeline. He kind of does. It's a weird kind of place for DeAndre Ayton, but I think if the right price came for DeAndre Ayton for a team that is looking for an offensive-minded big, I think things could work out in terms of a trade there. And then you're looking at somebody like a Robert Williams, who if he plays and he's healthy, he has a ton of kind of defensive upside when he is healthy. We saw him with that run with the Boston Celtics. So they have a lot of guys on this roster that could turn into a lot of draft capital or maybe even young talent in itself. So I think this expectation should be a big seller at the deadline if you're Portland. Go try to tank for Cooper Flagg, because I think if you can go into next season, now this upcoming one, with Scoot Henderson, Shaedon Sharpe, Deni Avdija, Cooper Flagg, and like Donovan Clean / DeAndre Ayton, depending on what happens with DeAndre Ayton and if he gets traded or not, something like that, I think you're looking at a really core wing duo of Deni and Cooper Flagg, and then you have a nice backcourt of Scoot and Shaedon Sharpe. I feel like that is going to help you be more prepared for the future. But one thing I want to see expectation-wise is like I want to see Scoot Henderson have a bounce-back year. I think that would be huge just for the morale of the Portland Trailblazers, because they kind of had a disappointing year one to the rebuild, which happens. You have to give these rebuilds time. You can't just be jumping the gun and saying Scoot Henderson's a bust, because you saw Brandon Miller was a bust. Now Brandon Miller's hooping like you thought Scoot Henderson was going to hoop. You have to give these things time in the NBA, and the Portland Trailblazers have a lot of time. The main question I do have for this team going forward, what do you do with Anthony Simons? Kind of like I started out the video saying, Anthony Simons kind of at that logjam spot. What team does he fit with? Let me know in the comments what kind of trade scenarios you could see them dealing Anthony Simons, and especially also you can put Jeremy Grant ones, DeAndre Ayton ones. We can have a whole kind of Portland Trailblazers kind of fire sale deadline prediction kind of thing. But that is all I have for this episode of Let's Talk About It. Thank you guys for tuning into the Barrel Talk podcast. Hope you tune in to future episodes.